about 20, 14, 10 seconds away from the live. So come on in the room. You got a few seconds to come on in before I actually get started. And here we are live on a Sunday evening. Happy Sunday. I'm Renita Alexander, the Leadership Locksmith, and this is Set It Up Sunday. So if you are here live, thank you so much for joining me. And if you're not here, if you're watching this after the fact, thank you for joining me after the fact. I appreciate you being here or checking us out, seeing what's up for this week. So this is Set It Up Sunday. This is my weekly discussion on all things leadership. And I really talk about how to set your week up, whatever that looks like, your month, your year, your life for success. And at what's undergirding Set It Up Sunday is this idea of intentionality. And so being intentional about whatever it is that you're choosing to do. And I talk about it a lot of different ways. So there is the practical part where, I'm talking about, scheduling the things that you can do to prepare to do the things that you want to do. But even before that, we have discussed all the roles that you play and how to make sure those roles that you are doing the things that you want to do in all those roles. So for me, particularly when I was on active duty Air Force, obviously I was an officer. I was a mom. All the roles that I played, I really took a lot of time to make sure that I was doing the things that I wanted to do for all of those roles, so that I was fulfilling those roles in a way that I wanted to fulfill them. And so, again, it's all about intentionality. And so I started this week, this month, I've been talking about trauma. And I started the conversation actually a couple of weeks ago. And I was talking about, of course, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, and how she had really handled herself during her Supreme Court nomination interview. So the hearings that were televised, of course, and watching the opposition party, the party in opposition to, of course, President Biden, who nominated her, just watching the way that they treated her and the disrespect that they showed her was really traumatic. It was really a traumatizing experience for many people. I saw many people talk about how it angered them to watch the way she was being treated. But she herself was like just this unruffled. She was so calm, so composed in the way that she comported herself. And so what I took from that is that she had three things. So I talked about her being anchored through her faith and her family, her identity. You got a sense that she really knew who she knows who she is, and so was not even bothered by the things that these other people were saying. I also felt like she had to be aware of any trauma and triggers or trauma triggers, because again, they were throwing so much at her. For her to not respond emotionally, she had to be, again, anchored and then really aware and healed of any traumatic experience that she might have had in her childhood or even as a young adult. And then that allowed her in the moment to intentionally choose actions that were going to be in alignment with what it is that she was trying to do. And of course, in this case, successfully be hired for the job. And of course she was, and so excited about that. Every time, I've watched her comments that she made on Friday, and of course our Vice President Kamala Harris introducing her, and just seeing these two powerful Black women speak, be so brilliant, be so excellent, and speak from their authentic experiences was just so heartening. And I just, again, was emotional every time I saw it. But I also thought back to, of course, the event that happened right after I talked about watching her and getting a sense of who she was again, which was 2 weeks ago. Turned on the television and actually witnessed real time the slap administered by Will Smith to Chris Rock. And so a lot of people, well, those are two different things. Yes, there are two different things, two different professions, but it is really similar in that it's how do we respond to stress? How do we respond to trauma? And it started me on this discussion about how trauma can derail us, how trauma affects us. What it is, of course, what I talked about last week. So I want to continue that discussion again, talking about trauma last week. First of all, let me just say this. I've written about this. I've talked about this in several platforms on social media. In my discussions about trauma, I am not excusing anybody's behavior. Even an unconscious choice is a choice. However, I'm offering this information as a way of explaining sometimes how we get to what seems like a behavior that we don't necessarily want to display. And so last week I talked about where trauma comes from. It's a Greek word that means wounding, and so trauma is a wound. And it's the result of something that's happened to us, so an experience, an event, and it often happens in childhood. And the trauma wound is not the event, the experience, the words, whatever the traumatic event was. It's what happens inside of us as a result of what happens to us. And so in the case of psychological trauma, it may be an experience we don't even remember. But it impacts us some kind of way, emotionally, and also resides in our body. And so I'm going to be referring to unhealed trauma as a wound. It's like an open wound. And even though we may have developed some scar tissue over it, it is unhealed. And so that's how I'm going to refer to this wound as unhealed trauma. And the result of that wound is we are disconnected from ourselves. And so it's not a conscious disconnection. It's our magnificently complex beings maybe protecting us from the pain that might be unbearable, might even be pain that we don't remember, but it is the pain that we are dealing with from perhaps being from being disconnected. And so the disconnection is from pain that might be unbearable, like for instance the loss of attachment. So again, we lose sort of the connection to our core, to our essence. And just like socialization, which I talk a lot about, trauma can shape our reality. It can shape our sense of safety. Obviously, it affects our relationships. And it gives us this shame-based view of ourselves. So this week, I really wanted to focus on how trauma shows up. So how does trauma show up in our lives? So unhealed trauma, again, let me make sure I'm saying unhealed trauma. So it can, some of the ways it shows up can be, we get angry. And so we respond to something in anger. It can include denial about something that is perhaps happening to us or something that's happening in real time. It can show up in that we're sad or, again, some kind of a emotional outburst. And so a lot of that behavior, again, it's rooted in the past. It is not necessarily present behavior, and there's nothing wrong with any of those emotional responses. Anger, for instance, in the present moment to something that happens to us. There's nothing wrong with anger. But what happens when you have unhealed trauma is you can be triggered by something in the present that takes you back to the past. And now you're responding to something that is, that may have reminded you of the traumatic event you experience, you're responding as if you're back in that original wound, as if you're experiencing that original wound. Unhealed trauma also manifests itself physically. So, some common physical signs of trauma include lethargy. You're lethargic. You may be tired. There are all kinds of things that show up, in our bodies as sickness, as disease. And one of the things in this course that I'm actually taking on trauma is often, when we go to the doctor and we're complaining about physical symptoms, there's no discussion about some of the other things that may be happening in our lives. Like, where are we emotionally? What's happening in our lives that may be manifesting itself in our bodies? We may have anxiety, or we may have panic attacks. We may be unable to really cope in certain circumstances. And so those are some physical symptoms. And not only does this impact us, but it also impacts our friends and families that are in our space. So it's really difficult to help someone that you may see that they're going through something, but of course they're in denial about it, or maybe they're pushing you away, and you're offering this help to them, and of course they're unable to receive it at the time. So again, there is the what trauma is, there is the how it shows up. And again, I just want to emphasize this, because I was having this discussion with someone, and they said, well, it doesn't. And of course, we were talking about the incident, the slap, and the response of Will Smith to Chris Rock's joke. I can't get the word out. Well, it's and they said, well, it's inexcusable. It's like, I'm not making an excuse. So I'm not saying that this excuses the behavior. I'm, again, simply trying to offer some understanding of the behavior, because the thing is, all of us experience some kind of trauma. It may not be a big traumatic event, but but we often experience small traumatic events, even as infants, when our bodies, our magnificently complex bodies, choose for us, and it's not a conscious choice, especially when we are infants and even toddlers, to maintain attachment to our families, to our caregivers. And so we often, even as children, are told, or some things are communicated us that are in opposition to what we want or who we are. And then to maintain that connection, we sometimes disconnect from ourselves. And so even though the trauma may not be unhealed trauma may not be a result of a really big traumatic event, even smaller events can create the disconnection that is the underlying wound from the traumatic event. So that is kind of how it shows up. Next week, I am so pleased. I'm going to have a guest with me, and we're going to talk about some ways that you can start to heal from your trauma. I'm going to have Crystal Turner is going to join me. So Crystal and I are doing a couple of things in partnership. We are a part of You Have the Power experience that we're doing at the end of April. And so check my various social media platforms to get information about that. I'll also add it to the notes from this broadcast. But anyway, Crystal is a participant in this collaborative event that I'm also participating in. And she is a psychiatric nurse, and she has obviously a medical perspective on trauma. So next Sunday, as a part of Set It Up Sunday, we're going to talk about some ways that we can deal with the trauma that shows up in our lives. And so I hope you join me for that. We'll probably go a little bit longer. So instead of 15 minutes. We may go 30 or even 45 minutes. So just give you a heads up for that. All right. So unless there are any questions. Yes. Hey, April, how are you? Thank you for joining me. Yes, trauma is real. And we all have trauma in our lives. And one of the questions that I'll be asking in the next week, and you can think about this, is how you have perhaps responded to traumatic events in your life. You don't have to give us, the details about the trauma, but maybe how you've responded in a way that was helpful to you. I know I'll be sharing, if we have a little bit of time. I was actually triggered in the last couple of years from some trauma that I experienced, in childhood that required me to get a little therapy. And so, there are things that happen. Again, it doesn't have to be that big trauma, that we often think about when we think about traumatic events. But there are things that happen to us that cause us to lose the connection to who we are at our core, and that is also can leave an unhealed wound. So, thank you so much for joining me. Thanks for engaging and for watching even after the fact. I'm going to give you the rest of your Sunday evening back, and I hope to see you when I'm here next Sunday for Set It Up Sunday. Have a great rest of your evening.